Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What We Can't Not Talk About, the podcast of the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. After a very long pause, I can say we're back, and I'm very happy to be back. I'm Dr. Mariana Orlandi, the Executive Director of the Institute, and I'm very, very glad to be doing this again. So today, not only we're back, but we're also at the Austin Institute. This is Stumberg Hall. This is our living room where countless philosophical conversations have taken and will continue to take place. Students are welcome to come here if they haven't already done so between classes, to read, to rest, to chat with us. And today I'm joined here in person in 3 dimensions by our guest, Professor Jay Budziszewski. Good morning, Jay.
Good morning, Mariana. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Welcome back at the Institute. Welcome back on our show. You've been with us more than once. Professor Budziszewski has also been a senior fellow of the Austin Institute, I think, from the very start.
Yeah, I guess as soon as you had senior fellows.
Right, so I'd say 8 years or something like that.
That.
And more than that, he has been teaching at the university at UT Austin since 1981.
That's right.
I wasn't born. That's one of those few moments where I can say that proudly. But okay, that's quite a long time.
You're fortunate. It was very difficult to find parking there because the brontosauri were so big.
Well, okay. Thank you for the laugh. Professor Budziszewski, for the very few who might not know him, everyone should know you by now, is an American philosopher and a professor of government and philosophy at UT. He specializes in ethics, political philosophy, and interaction of these two fields with religion and theology. He's an Aquinas expert, prolific writer, very prolific, of both scholarly and non-scholarly books and articles. When I say an Aquinas expert, he has written 5 commentaries.
Well, it depends on whether there's a free online supplement to one of them, so I don't ever know whether they count that or not. Let's say 5.
Yeah. One book is about to be published.
That's right.
Your last book.
Commentary on Thomas Aquinas' treatise on the One God will be published in early November.
Okay, so just be sure to buy that one. And he's also an extremely generous mentor and friend. He never refused to come here, talk to the students. He never refused my invitation to a podcast. So thank you also for that. But you're also extremely responsive to an email. You're generous. And generosity is one of the virtues. And you taught me that all virtues go together. So I can assume a lot of very good things about you. And I want to thank you not only for coming here today, but again, for everything you've done and you continue to do for so many students.
I'm grateful for the opportunity. I think Austin Institute is terrific. And without your work here, I wouldn't have a lot of these opportunities. So that's good.
Well, we're grateful to provide them and we'll continue to do so. But as promised today, I would like for us to talk about one of your favorite topics, which happens to be also one of my favorite topics, so from a very different perspective, which is natural law.
Right.
So if I may, because it's also election season, I don't know when we're going to be, streamed, but maybe before the elections, I would like to start by showing you and our audience a very short clip on the matter of natural law.
Sure.
So the video will be embedded. We're going to watch it here together now.
I look here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll show it to you. I wanted an immediate reaction, so we'll see. Or maybe you've already seen it, but...
I'm going to I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break to accommodate the judge. In just a minute, I want to put to rest one notion here, Judge, if I may. Hopefully attempt to put it to rest. One, do not count me as one of your detractors because I ask you tough questions. Number 2, the issue of natural law may confound the people, to use Senator Simpson's phrase, but not a single legal scholar in America. And I hope you meet that test, or you shouldn't be on the Supreme Court. You must have a knowledge and insight to the Constitution that is better than the average lawyer. And I'm sure you do. That's why I'm sure you understand what I'm about to say. Not a single legal scholar in America fails to understand the significance of whether and how one applies natural law. Judge Bork devoted a chapter in his book about how those people who want to apply natural law are bad, not bad in a moral sense, are wrong. There's an entire school of thought that you are fully familiar with. I'm not failing to accept your answers yesterday. I just want to make sure we all know what we're talking about here, that you and I know at least what we're talking about here. There's not a single legal scholar who does not understand that there's a fervent, bright, and aggressive school of thought that wishes to see natural law further inform the Constitution than it does now, argued against by the positivists led by Judge Bork. Now again, that may be lost on all the people. You know and I know what we're talking about. Now, all I'm out to do in my second round, and others are, is to find out whether you, in fact, do apply natural law, and if you do, how. You answered that partially yesterday. I'm somewhat confused. I'll come back to it. But let the record know, for all the press to know, whether someone applies natural law is of phenomenal significance. And there's not a single legal scholar in America you can question who will not tell you that is not true. Now, you may apply it, someone may apply it in a way, like Moore, who leads him in a direction that is, quote, liberal. You may apply it in a way that leads you in a direction that's conservative. Or you may, like many argue, not apply it at all. But it is a fundamental question that is going to be almost impossible for non-lawyers to grasp in an exchange. But you know and I know it is a big, big deal. And in conclusion, the only reason most of us I asked you about natural law is that is how you gained your reputation, rightly or wrongly. When you are spoken about by other lawyers, when you were spoken about in the press, I didn't invent it. You are spoken about in terms of your speeches on natural law. Now, I accept for the moment that everybody misunderstood you. Well, not everybody. Let me be precise. That they were just philosophic musings. I accept that for the moment. But I don't want any senator to think that, quote, your detractors are out there searching for a theory that doesn't have significance. I, like Senator Simpson, didn't do well in law school. Probably worse than Senator Simpson. No, I did very poorly in law school. I did very poorly in law school. But I spent an awful lot of time since law school dealing with this subject. And I know it. And you know and I know what a judge's view on this issue is of phenomenal consequence to the future of this country. And again, if your view is, stated view, and I'm needed explored further, is...
Yeah, there was, I hope everyone did not enjoy it. Just saying, you know, and I know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know. Okay. Starting off also by saying that this is Biden, then president of the committee in that moment, is saying, legal scholars will understand because it's too complicated for others.
Yes. Yes, it's too complicated. That's right. But we know.
We know, right? So anyway, can you, as Justice Thomas, this clip was used also in the beautiful documentary that was made about Justice Thomas' life.
Mm-hmm.
Very beautiful. I recommend watching it. And he says, I had no clue what he was talking about. Speaking of the question that was asked, but could you tell us what was now President Biden trying to say?
What President Biden was insinuating was that there was reason to suspect that Judge Clarence Thomas, who was soon to be Justice Clarence Thomas, would apply his own personal opinions, calling them natural law rather than applying the Constitution to make decisions.
But what does he say? When he says you may apply it in a liberal way, you may apply it in a conservative.
Well,
you may not apply it. So what natural law is he?
Well, many people think that the natural law is just a sort of an empty phrase, that all you mean by calling it the natural law is it's right. So when you say the natural law requires this, the natural law requires that, it's merely your own opinion that you're enforcing. You're beating people down by saying, well, it's the natural law. And this is a view that is widely held on the left. It's also held in certain quarters on the right among a lot of legal positivists. My friend Nilino Graglia at the law school was very suspicious of natural law arguments for this reason. He said, it's just going to be what you say it is. And so what we're replacing responsible judicial decision based on the text of the law with the merely subjective opinions of judges.
So what instead is the real definition of natural?
Well, the natural law is the moral law, but not as known from the Bible. We call that usually divine law. It doesn't challenge the authority of that, but it's the moral law as known by our human design. I may know, I am a Christian, I may know God says in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder. All right, I accept that as authoritative. But why does that even make sense to me? Why does it even make sense to me when God says through Moses, thou shalt not murder? Why doesn't this strike me as something arbitrary? Gee, he doesn't want me to murder? Why would he tell me something like that? I don't get that, because we also have a law written on the heart. This is the natural law. It is, or at least it's an aspect of the natural law. There are things which we really can't not know because we are human beings. These things are built into the structure of the moral intellect. Now, when I was young, this was troubling to me. My teachers were all skeptics about the natural law. They hardly said anything about it except to dismiss it in a couple of sentences. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me either. If somebody said, this is God's law, I understood what that meant because God used words. If somebody said, this is the natural law, whereas some of the ancient Greek and Roman writers said, nature speaks, nature says this, nature dictates, declares this. I thought, nature doesn't have a voice. Nature isn't using words. What could that mean? But our nature reveals certain things about how our design, the way we're put together, reveals certain things about how beings of our nature need to live. For example, there is deep conscience. There is you can't not know that it is wrong to do gratuitous harm to another person. That's pretty elementary. There's a lot of details that are more difficult, but that's pretty easy. Now, what premise did you get that from? What axiom did you derive that theorem from? You didn't. It's a first principle. It's per se nota. It's known in itself. And anybody who says he doesn't know that is lying. Lying perhaps to himself, but he's lying. All right, so that has to do with nature because it's about the nature of our moral intellect. Now, we also recognize spontaneously the reality of the designer. I've spoken of our design, our human nature, but it doesn't strike us as a blooming, buzzing confusion. There's something, it strikes people oddly when some evolutionary biologists will say, well, man is merely the meaningless and purposeless result of a process that did not have him in mind. There seem to be meanings and purposes built into us. Now that points us to the designer. And if there is a designer, then we owe him big time. So that suggests an obligation of worship. The third thing is the details of the design. We observe ourselves and we see, for instance, that we are social beings. For us, the good life isn't even good unless we can share it with other people. We see that we are made with a view to marriage and family. I don't mean everybody has to marry, but I mean that we aren't solitary hermits. We depend on each other. We also see that we come in two sexes and they are complementary. Men are really incomplete without women. Even if they're not married, they need the influence of women in their lives. It balances them. Women are incomplete too without men. We need each other. These are details of our design. So there's the third way that nature teaches us. And then there's the fourth way, and that's the witness of natural consequences. What the Bible calls the law of the harvest, but the Bible is only pointing to something that we already know anyway. Even without any Bible, if you live certain ways, you will find only your ruin. If I desert my children, I'll have nobody to comfort me when I'm old and feeble. If I am disloyal to my friends, I pretty soon won't have any friends. If I live by knives, I'll die by knives. If I abuse drugs, I will become their slave. If I lie to myself, there are even intellectual consequences of this. If I lie to myself, pretty soon I'm going to have a hard time telling what's true and false anymore. Now, so in these ways, these all make sense intuitively to people, these four ways by which our very nature, the very fabric of our created experience, informs us. And natural law theory is based on that. Now, here's the deal. One thing that then Senator Biden blurred over, he said, of course, this goes over the heads of most people. Yeah, the theory of natural law may go over the heads of most people, like the theory of gravitation may go over the heads of most people.
We all know.
But we all know that we have weight. We all know that if we walk off the cliff, we're going to fall. We all know if we slip on a banana, we might break our hips. In the same way, we may not know the theory of natural law, but we know that we ought to be faithful to our spouses. We know a lot of the content of it. Well, then, if you know a lot of that stuff already, what do you need the theory for? Well, that's like saying, what do you need to know anything about engineering or gravity since you already know that you have weight? Well, maybe you don't need to know the theory of gravitation to walk across the floor, but you need to know it in order to build a good house.
Yes, and
maybe you don't need the natural law explanation of the procreative and the unitive goods of marriage in order to understand that you should be faithful to your spouse. But on the other hand, I've been living with this woman for a while. Is she my spouse? There are some details that aren't going to be clear.
And you might need to know it if you're Justice Thomas, right? If you're at that moment, if at some point in your life you're required to change a law, you need to understand that law was not there just because it was the rule of the powerful or because it was, or because that's what the American culture dictated at the moment where the Constitution was written. No, there is something profoundly true and profoundly right about what
and
is
enduring. That it is always true. This is a perpetual truth. It was something that's often misunderstood here. It's again this problem of his subjective opinion. Well, this is what I think the natural law is. But even if a judge is a legal positivist and he says, I will look at nothing but the text of the Constitution, you have to rely on the natural law to know what the text of the Constitution means. For instance, the restatement of contracts, as it's called, lawyers know what that is, says, I'm paraphrasing here, that a promise is binding if and only if the failure, it's enforceable, if and only if the failure to enforce the contract would lead to injustice. Now, this has been built into the law, so this is something written down. But notice that in order to understand those written down words, you have to have some knowledge of the natural law. What is justice? You have to know this isn't just. You can say, well, I can define that. Okay, justice is giving to each person what is due to him. But then I still need to have something that isn't just in the words to know, well, what is due to him? You always, definitions eventually end up with things that are primitives, that just have to be there as indefinables. You have to get something, or 1,000 dictionaries will mean nothing to you. And this is the knowledge of the natural law.
I mean, and this is also where we got here, like, in a documentary called What is a Woman? But also, if I may, one thing that came to mind is how, to me, the natural law made more and more sense the more I was studying comparative law.
Yes.
Because you might define crimes in different ways, but all cultures had crimes, and all crimes implied a penalty.
And
So-
and what they made crimes wasn't arbitrary.
No, but
Right. They'll all say murder is wrong.
true. But even if we stopped, because I was having this conversation about, structures of novels and why they're structured in a particular way. So maybe the content will change, but for instance, a fairy tale.
Yes.
We always know when there's a good end. Like we know when an ending is good. It might be a little different,
Uh-huh.
but you want, the princess and the knight to end back, to end together. You don't
Uh-huh.
want her to live a solitary life and be, rejected by everyone.
That's right.
For some reason, we all understand that's not a
This
happy
isn't
ending.
hard for us.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that sense, that and I know and nobody else will understand, that's the lie to me, which we need to, to bring up and say, no, natural law, meaning knowing what is good and what is bad is something that everyone can do.
And that everyone knows. Now the problem is that when you're highly educated, you're prone to certain kinds of stupidities that ordinary people are not prone to. When I was in graduate school, I didn't believe that. I thought the good and evil are just subjective things we make up. What was one of the first thoughts that made me doubt that? Okay, stick your finger in a candle flame. No, I don't want to do that. It hurts. Well, you don't want it to hurt? No. Are you saying pain is bad? Well, it's just something that subjectively I prefer not to have. Well, if you were to change your mind about this through drugs or hypnosis or education or something, so you thought pain was good, would that be all right? Since it's arbitrary anyway, wouldn't that outcome be just as good? And now you'd say sticking your finger in the candle flame would be fine? Nobody would want to change and think that it was okay, which shows that he doesn't think that it's a subjective preference. He knows that it's a preference of the subject that is based on an objective reality.
And more than that, I would go even beyond. So when I said, everyone can know it, and the pretext for our talk today was one of your latest paper published on the National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly, why natural law is for everyone. And what I said was everyone can know what is good and what is wrong. I didn't say everyone knows.
Yeah.
And the reason is not only what you said, that the more we get educated and refined, the more we want to try to come up with our own answer and the new excellent theory that is going to explain, injustice in the world. But at the same time, there is a problem of education. And you bring it up very well, I think, in this article. Something that is natural doesn't mean that is self-evident in the sense of being instinctive. If I am raised thinking that a happy ending is a ending with 4 husbands, I might start deceiving myself and believing it. And so one thing that I think that older generations owe to the youngest ones that are maybe making a lot of mistakes is that if some good old knowledge is not passed down, natural law is not going to be, what is good and what is bad is not evident to people who are 18, 20, 30.
Let's think about that and let's fine tune that insight. Actually, some things are evident, but a lot of the details are not evident. And even the things that are evident to you, you may not notice that you know them. They may have to be pointed out to you. Somebody says, but don't you see that so-and-so? And you think to yourself, yeah, I guess I believed that all along, but I didn't know it. Okay? Certain obvious things about friendship, certain obvious things about relationships between the sexes, we may know at some level, but we aren't aware of knowing them. So a part of moral education, a part of the education of the natural law is bringing it to the surface, connecting the dots, putting us in, not discarding our common sense, but building on it and elevating it. Now, it's like arithmetic in one way. in arithmetic too, some things are just known in themselves. Equals added to equals are equal. But on the other hand, if you say to a third grader, equals added to equals are equal, he's not going to know what you mean. It's not that he doesn't know it, but he doesn't understand what you're saying. If you say, the reason you're able to teach him that 2 + 2 is 4 is that eventually he gets it.
But also that he trusts you.
Well, yes, he trusts you. But on the other hand, if you told him that 2 and 3 was 4, it would never make sense to him, even if he trusted you. So, but if you say to a kid, well, how many fingers do I have here? 1, 2. How many fingers do I have here? 1, 2. All right, I'm putting them together. Now how many do I have? 4. So 2 and 2 is 4. Oh yeah, I get it. So something that is self-evident was not previously evident to him. And teaching elicits that awareness.
But couldn't we argue here that the reason I mentioned trust is probably my belief in authority, and how we cannot have education if we do not agree with the concept even of authority?
Well, I agree.
Because there are things, 2 and 2, I'll teach you, but like I could find another teacher that is gonna make it easier. So maybe the example in that case cannot be that one, but like when I'm trying to understand, what is the nature of marriage? What is the right form of government? I need to trust certain professors, certain institutions to have a solution, because I cannot, otherwise I would have the arrogance when I'm 18 or 20 to think that I, again, came up with the brilliant theory, or that this new person that is now preaching for tribes, that just, I don't know, go around and rob the neighboring tribe. That's the new solution. Like, I know it's going to work because it all makes sense. And so in a sense, don't we need to accept that there are things like knowledge of good and evil,
sure,
that require for us to trust our ancestors or our teachers?
Oh yeah, many things about this are, even in my mathematical example, you have to know that the teacher is trustworthy and he is going to explain you. He is going to lead you to the truth that 2 + 2 is 4. And he's not going to just confuse you and say, well, it's all up to you, as there are now some math teachers who say. Did you know that? There are some math teachers who say it's all up to you.
I do.
Let's all discuss it. What is 2 + 2? 5. That's a good answer. And what is your answer? You have to have somebody who has the authority to teach this, and you have to trust that person. It's like this in any kind of field. It's in apprenticeships. It's and a lot of this knowledge is transmitted sometimes by words, sometimes by examples, sometimes in ways that we aren't really sure. If I don't know very well how to aim at the target, the wind is blowing from this side. Should I aim over this a little bit this way? Yes. Well, how much? Well, not too much and not too little. But how much is that? You gradually learn by experience with this teacher whom you trust, the master archer. We need these people. They induct us into a way of life. They introduce us. They apprentice us to a way of life and to a way of wisdom.
And don't you think that differently from the past? Maybe I'm wrong here, but I think that nowadays, when you made the example of like, in everything we need authority and trust. Like, we know that engineers need to learn from engineers that build bridges that, are still up. You don't want to learn. But somehow in morality, we think there's less need for that.
Uh-huh.
Is that a modern phenomenon?
There have always been some people who took that view, but I would say it is a modern phenomenon that it is taken for granted as true and widespread, instead of being a minority view, okay, or a view just of certain niche groups of people. And yeah, that's true. And we are going through a sort of an eerie phase of history where even the things that everybody knows are considered not just wrong, but bad to believe. If you make a moral judgment, this is a way of life that will lead to your ruin. How intolerant you are, so that even so that we are made to feel guilty if we have attained some wisdom about these matters. And that's a real problem, and that's pervasive in our whole educational system. It's pervasive in our institutions, in the law.
So, and one of the reasons natural law is called natural law is also that it has, and you mentioned it, is one of the ways to understand that there is such thing as natural law, is that there are consequences for violating.
Sure.
So what do you think what consequences are the ones that you see or that you recognize the most?
Okay. Well, I mentioned some of them earlier. I would say that there are firstly physical consequences, bodily consequences, like the consequence. If I cut my wrist, I'm going to bleed and it's going to hurt. I may die. If there are social consequences, if I don't really have the art of friendship and know the principles of friendship and the rules of friendship, I will either not have any friends or I'll have bad friendships, poor friendships that may not even make me happier. If I don't take care of there are familial consequences. If I'm not faithful to my wife, my marriage may fall apart. There are intellectual consequences. If I lie to myself, when you were a little girl, I'm sure in Italy they still keep cookies in cookie jars, right? Did you ever sneak a cookie when mom said no? You do. And did you ever lie to your mom? I did. No. What's that rattling around in there? It's the dog pushing around his supper dish. We don't have a dog. It's the cat. We don't have a cat. I guess, well, it's the neighbor cat came in the door and was making some kind of noise. What are you doing in there? Honest, Mom, I'm not eating cookies. Now, you notice that in that sequence that we're all familiar with, to cover up one lie, I'm not eating cookies, you have to tell another lie. To cover up that lie, you have to tell another. To cover up that one, you have to tell another, until you're so buried in these lies that you lose track of them yourself and you end up having to deceive yourself. So that's an intellectual consequence. There are physical, social, familial, intellectual. There are consequences for our happiness.
I mean, we could argue, and I argue it at least, that self-deception then leads us to not see it. So you could have people telling me that they live very well having cheated on all their wives. They're living very well not having friends. They're living very well with all the unhealthy habits. At the same time, we have the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
We have one of the best healthcare system in the world, and life, expectancy is not growing. Like, people are not happy. A lot of dying because of bad habits.
Mm-hmm. A lot of suicide.
Exactly. And a lot of depression. Abuse of this kind of medication, it now it's normalized among healthy young people to take antidepressants. Now, doesn't that suggest
that something's wrong?
That's something,
Yes.
and maybe it's not about the power structures.
Yeah.
I'm just saying maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the difficulty is this: as soon as one says something like this, as soon as one speaks of self-deception, somebody is going to say, "Oh, that's a logical fallacy. You're saying I say something and you say I'm wrong. You prove it by saying you're self-deceived." No, that's an empirical claim that somebody is self-deceived, and it's subject to evidence like anything else. Let's suppose, for instance, that somebody says, I don't feel bad about what I did, but you find that they're always blurting it out and confessing it in odd ways. That's pretty strong evidence of something that's trying to come up. Suppose you find somebody who says, "No, I didn't do anything bad," but you find that after they did it, they start seeming to punish themselves.
I find it maybe, I was a defense attorney,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell. I mean, the one thing, and I think confessors hear it all the time, people are uncomfortable with some of the things they've done.
A federal judge told me that when the list of the crimes that the guy had committed, or this stuff was read in court, some of the people that he used to have in his courtroom would break down in tears. Yeah. And he didn't believe that they were faking it. This was something that they were obviously trying not to do, but they couldn't stand thinking about how they'd live.
It's like, I don't know, the image that comes to mind sometimes is like having a mirror, right? Which is why we were chatting before the recording, that I do a lot of introspection. Like, I think a lot of people, might not want to, because it's that moment where you turn the mirror and you stop, taking pictures around, but like you look at yourself and like what you have done, where you fell short. And it can be painful if you haven't looked into it for a while, which then makes it harder and harder to do it.
Oh, sure.
After a long time.
And you find all kinds of ways to distract yourself from seeing your life. You surround yourself with such a bustle of activity that you have no time to reflect on anything. You have music blaring so loud that you can't hear your own thoughts. You do things like this.
But so why then, back to the title of it, why then is it worth doing it? Why is it worth sticking with the natural law? Why is it worth?
Well, at the deepest level, if these really are the rules for human nature, that means they're the rules for the flourishing of human nature. As one of my favorite natural law thinkers and theologians, Janet Smith, likes to say, that there are certain laws of the tomato plant. It needs sunshine, it needs water, it needs to be in good soil, and if it doesn't, it's going to wither and it's going to die. This is about the flourishing of the tomato plant. The natural law is about the flourishing of the human being. We have to live this way. It's not a shackle on us, keeping us from our happiness. It releases us for our happiness. We have this idea that we can create ourselves and make up any pattern of life that we want. Any good artist knows that he needs to respect his medium. You don't try to do stuff that you would do with steel if you're carving with wood. You don't do woody stuff when you're working with steel. You understand that watercolor has to be dealt with differently than oil. Well, the medium of human development is human nature, and you have to respect that medium too, or you can't. Sure, we can paint beautiful pictures. I'm going to be a welder. I'm going to be a school teacher. I'm going to be a policeman. I'm going to be directing the Austin Institute. But the medium in which those figures are drawn is not something that you drew. It's your human nature, and it has its laws. Those are the natural laws.
And it's, yeah. I'm satisfied with the answer. I don't know if everyone is, but like, I do have, I hope they are. I mean, I just can't, it does make a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. I can't argue for the opposite. It would be really hard to be the devil's advocate. One question that we had during our, we would try to have in our staff meeting conversations also with some of the students that are interns, some have been your students. We were discussing natural law. So the one thing that came up was the wrongly so Catholic connotation of natural law. This seems
Catholic what of natural
connotation, like
okay.
The fact that it seems to be in the Catholic tradition mm-hmm. to have such thing as natural law. Is that true? Is natural law a Catholic thing?
Well, it is and it isn't. It is in the sense that the greatest natural law thinkers have been Catholics, and the Catholic Church proclaims as part of its doctrine, the magisterium teaches that there is a natural law, that this is true. In that sense, it's Catholic. But it is not Catholic in the sense that you have to be a Catholic to believe it, or that nobody except Catholics believes it. What the Church says is that this is something that can be recognized by reason, which is and can be directed to all people of goodwill. The earliest systematic natural law thinkers were, as a matter of fact, pagans, Greeks and Romans, and the Church learned from them. It learned from Aristotle, for example, a pagan. He didn't use the expression natural law, but the normative quality, the directive quality of our human nature was implicit in all of his works, and he obviously thinks that it's law-like. So But we've had this all along. Secular people think it's a Catholic thing. Sometimes Catholics think it's a Roman thing. The Romans thought that it was a Greek thing. The Greeks thought, oh, it's only something of the philosophers. But no.
A white concept now.
What?
Maybe now it's become a white concept.
It's a human thing.
Yeah.
It's a human thing, and the Catholic Church, when it is trying to speak to other people about the natural law, often speaks of it that way. The natural virtues are the human virtues, the virtues that human beings need. The natural law is the laws of human nature. We may know some of the same things from the divine law, but this isn't God said so do it.
Yeah.
This is you're made this way so that you can't flourish unless you do it, so do it. Now, if you dig deep enough in there, you find that your nature has an author, and it's that same God. But you can talk quite a bit before you get there.
Yeah, and also there, I would, I always say I'm going to repeat myself and this to some people that know me, but like faith is a gift ultimately. So in that is an infused virtue, right? So there is something that it must be possible to get almost to the full truth, even without it. Right.
Yes, I think that, now that raises an interesting question. You say almost to the full truth. What's missing in the natural law? Well, there are some things missing. It may tell you you need to live like this, and you're going to be messed up if you don't live like this, and you're going to be full of guilt and brokenness, but it doesn't tell you how to be forgiven.
True.
It doesn't tell you how to be reconciled with the God who made you. It doesn't tell you whether there is anything. It may include some hints, but it doesn't tell you with positivity only plausible arguments about whether there's anything beyond this life. Now, every now and then, even the pagan philosophers had glimpses of that. Yeah. Aristotle knew that we longed for something that nothing in nature can give us.
It would be beautiful. So I use the word longing. I recently read the 2 books by Bishop Varden, and the end of the one on chastity, he has a distinction between desire and longing and the Greek terms. They are different, and desire is something that it's self-referential. I do it for my own pleasure, but the longing speaks of the existence of something outside of me.
Yes.
That is attracting me.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Now, there is something outside of us that attracts us. Nature has a face. She looks up. And there is something that we want. Well, we want a lot of things. I may long for human love. Well, I can have human love. I may long for beauty. Well, I can find beauty. I may long for food when I'm hungry. Well, I can find food. But there is some longing that is still left over and enormously powerful even when all of those longings are satisfied. What is it? Aristotle had said, now remember, he's a pagan. Aristotle had said that God and nature, he thought it was perfectly philosophically reasonable to talk about God. You don't need revelation, he thought, just to know that. God and nature make nothing in vain. In other words, everything in us is for something. Why do you have eyes so that you can see? Why do you have that longing? If you have a longing for something, there must be something that can satisfy it. Well, if it's not within the order of nature, Aristotle almost got this far, and Thomas Aquinas takes this next step. If it's not in the order of nature, then it must be outside the order of nature. It must be God. Yeah. What we ultimately want, the natural law can't give you all of this. What we ultimately want is the vision of God.
I should close on this, but I won't. Because it was beautiful. It's a great ending, But again,
I'll say it again if you want to later.
It's so beautiful. We can always, they can always go back and rewatch and stuff there. But I wanted to ask, because you did write with this thing that natural law seems to be, in the sole domain of Catholics, which, as Carl Trueman, as a non-Catholic, brought it up in his book. At the end of his book, I say Protestants should appropriate natural law. And there are a lot of Jewish thinkers too. That write about natural law. One thing, though, is that what prompted, I think, even the publication of your paper was the 30th anniversary of Veritatis Splendor, which is an encyclical by John Paul II. So the
Yes.
question that I would have for you is, why did a pope feel the need to write about natural law if he has God, right? Like,
well, although I'm a Protestant-friendly Catholic. Before I was Catholic, I was a Catholic-friendly Protestant. I'm a Protestant-friendly Catholic, but as a Catholic, I do believe that the Church has a magisterium. It's true. That doesn't mean things aren't going to be messy in the Church. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be dissenters. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any theologians that deny this stuff, and there are. And there was a mess at the time that he wrote in moral theology. There were a lot of people who in moral theology had adopted a view called proportionalism, which is pretty much the same as what most secular philosophers call utilitarianism.
so we're talking about 1994 or something. This is the year we're- okay.
And it's the idea that there's really nothing that's categorically prohibited. It all depends on the results. It all depends on how things come out. And he wants to say, no. There really are some, among other things that he taught, there really are some exceptionless norms, some rules that have no exceptions, so that you can't say, let us do evil so that good will result. And he needed to do, that's one of the purposes for this, it was an instruction about the natural law, but it was partly occasioned, well, by a lot of things, but partly occasioned by that confusion among some theologians.
I want to close with a question that came from one of our students, and I'll pretend I don't have an answer myself, like very short, but like it's probably also an answer to the clip that we started with. So the question was, should natural law inform jurisprudence and laws?
It's impossible to keep it out. If you say, for instance, well, I'm going to construe the meaning of the due process law, the due process clause in the 14th Amendment, you should not take away life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Well, which process of law is really due to you? The Constitution doesn't tell you. Which liberties are authentic liberties? The Constitution lists some in the Bill of Rights, but it also even itself indicates that's not an exhaustive list. So which liberties are liberties? You've got to fall back on some understanding of the natural law that the framers themselves believed in and were pointing to. Read James Wilson. Read in his discourses on his lectures on law. Read the other founders. They were all over this stuff.
Another thing that comes to mind is the prohibition in international law of degrading and inhuman treatment. What is degrading? What is
you have to have some grasp of the natural law in order to talk about.
And what is a person too?
What is a person?
A human being worthy?
Sure, no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. What is a person? This is an interesting thing. The whole idea of the person has received a lot of attention in the 20th century and the 21st century, more than before. Thomas Aquinas had said it best. He said, "The person is the most perfect thing in all nature." And this is true. Human person is not just a what, it's a who. It's not just a thing, it's a rational soul embodied. It's not just a part of something else, like a screw in this apparatus. It's not just a process, like something this machine is doing. It's relationship. In one sense, we are parts of the community, but we're not parts of the community like my thumb is a part of me, so that I can, if I do something, it is my act. It isn't the community doing it through me. I'm not just a thumb of the community that is wiggling. And this is a profound insight, even that there are such things as persons.
I think this is how we should close.
Okay.
Because this, as I said at the beginning, that I thank you for having been here and for all the years that you've taught. And I think about this place, and now we always say we don't go by numbers. We don't care about numbers. We go one by one, right? The same thing is true with this episode. Like, the listeners are not numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not like 100 dogs or 500 monkeys. It's like, no, it's who's. It's like some very specific people are listening to this, and we are communicating something to them.
Because they are persons.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. So we thank Professor Budziszewski, we thank the natural law, and we thank the persons that have been watching us and listening to us. And we invite you all to continue to follow us, our channel, our podcast, our events, read the books and the amazing articles that Professor Budziszewski keeps writing very often.
That article is at my website. They can look it up. Look to the articles section.
We'll put the link at the bottom of the episode. So Thank you, Professor, and thank you all for listening.